Northern California in the late 1960s was a place of contradictions. The nation was reeling from the Vietnam War, civil unrest, and political assassinations. San Francisco, just across the Golden Gate, was alive with counterculture movements, protests, and music. Yet beneath the rhythm of freedom, a darker sound began to echo. The heavy, suffocating silence of fear. On December 20th, 1968, that silence was broken in Vallejo, California. The night was cold, the air sharp with winter frost. Teenagers David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, had driven out for a simple evening together. Young love, fragile and bright, seeking privacy on a lover's lane along Lake Herman Road. What happened next shattered the innocence of the small community. Witnesses reported hearing shots, but by the time officers arrived, Betty Lou was lying lifeless on the ground, her body riddled with bullets as she tried to run. David was slumped near their car, a gunshot wound to the head, barely clinging to life. He would not survive the night. There was no clear motive, no robbery, no sexual assault, just senseless execution. The brutality felt like war had suddenly invaded the quiet suburban lives of ordinary people. A battlefield had been drawn, but no one could see the enemy. The victims were not soldiers. They were children, students, dreamers, and their blood was now staining the soil of California. For the police, the crime was baffling. They had seen killings before, but this was different. Methodical, merciless, and committed with the cold precision of someone who seemed to enjoy the hunt. Vallejo residents whispered rumors: a jealous ex-boyfriend, a drifter, maybe someone from the nearby military base, but nothing fit. Months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969, the killer struck again. Darlene Ferrin, 22, a young woman known for her kindness, was out with a friend, 19-year-old Michael Mageau. They parked at Blue Rock Springs Park, just outside Vallejo. Fireworks still echoed in the distance, a country celebrating independence while two young people sat in the quiet of the night. A car pulled up behind them. At first, they thought it might be a friend. Instead, a man stepped out, flashlight in one hand, gun in the other. Without warning, he opened fire. Bullets tore through glass, metal, and flesh. Michael collapsed, screaming in agony, while Darlene slumped forward. The shooter walked away, then returned, coldly firing again into their bodies, ensuring devastation. Darlene was pronounced dead. Michael, despite being shot multiple times, survived. His testimony would later give police their first surviving witness. He described a heavy-set man around 5'8", possibly wearing glasses. But in the chaos, his memory blurred. Just 40 minutes later, the phone rang at Vallejo Police Department. A calm, measured voice reported the crime. "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The killer had just announced himself, not only as the murderer of Darlene and David and Betty Lou, but as someone who intended to play with the police, the press, and the public. Fear spread like wildfire. Vallejo was no longer safe. California was no longer safe. This was not random violence. This was the beginning of a war against ordinary people fought by a phantom who wanted recognition, power, and terror. He was not just killing, he was communicating. Within weeks, letters began arriving in newspapers across the Bay Area. Each was scrawled with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, a crude yet chilling insignia, a calling card, a signature. And with each letter came puzzles, cryptograms, taunts, and threats. The killer now had a name, the Zodiac. The morning of August 1, 1969, editors at 3 major newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, opened envelopes that would drag them into one of the most chilling games of cat and mouse in criminal history. Inside each envelope was a nearly identical letter. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, as if carved into the paper with pressure rather than ink. The words dripped with arrogance. "This is the Zodiac speaking." It was the first time the world would read the name he had chosen for himself, a moniker that gave him an identity larger than a man, something eternal, untouchable, symbolic. Each letter contained part of a cipher, 408 characters of symbols, circles, triangles, lines, cryptic designs that seemed to hide a secret message. The killer demanded that the newspapers publish the ciphers on their front pages, threatening to kill more if his demands were ignored. It was a declaration of war against the public, a psychological siege. Families whispered about locking doors, lovers hesitated before parking in secluded spots, and ordinary citizens felt the shadow of an invisible predator. The Chronicle complied, publishing the cipher. For days, readers puzzled over it. Some thought it was gibberish, others suspected military code. But on August 8, just a week later, a California schoolteacher, Donald Harden, and his wife, Betty, cracked it at their kitchen table. The message was haunting in its simplicity and cruelty. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. The words felt less like a confession and more like a manifesto, a soldier of chaos laying out his philosophy. For the Zodiac, murder wasn't just violence, it was entertainment, a twisted form of sport. But what struck investigators most was the ending. The message trailed off mid-sentence, leaving it unfinished, like a wound left open. It was deliberate. He was telling the world that he controlled the narrative, and he alone would decide when it ended. The Lake Berryessa attack on September 27, 1969, the war took a darker turn. At Lake Berryessa, north of Napa, two college students, Bryan Hartnell and Cecelia Shepard, were enjoying a picnic by the water. It was the kind of sunny day that belonged to peace, laughter, and young love. But peace shattered when a man approached wearing an eerie black hood, his chest marked with a white crosshair symbol, the Zodiac's insignia brought to life. In his hand, a gun. At his side, a long knife. He told them he was an escaped convict, that he needed their car and money to flee to Mexico. His voice was calm, steady, rehearsed. He tied them up with rope. At first, they thought it was a robbery. But then came the knife. He stabbed them over and over, Bryan 6 times, Cecelia 10. The earth soaked their blood, screams echoed over the water, and the sun that had promised warmth now bore witness to cruelty. Bryan survived, barely. Cecelia fought for 2 days in the hospital before her young body surrendered. Hours later, the phone at the Napa County Sheriff's Office rang. The same calm voice. I want to report a murder. No, a double murder. I am the one that did it. When officers reached Bryan's car, they found the Zodiac's handwriting scrawled on the door in black marker, listing the dates of his murders, the weapons used, and his symbol. It was a battlefield diary, a soldier keeping score. The San Francisco cab killing 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the war zone shifted to the heart of San Francisco. Paul Stine, a 29-year-old cab driver, picked up a fare at the intersection of Mason and Geary. His passenger directed him to Presidio Heights, a wealthy, quiet neighborhood. At the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets, the passenger pulled a gun. One shot to the head. Paul Stine slumped forward against the steering wheel. This time, the Zodiac didn't vanish into the shadows. He lingered. Calmly, he wiped down the cab with a rag, cutting a piece of Stine's bloody shirt as a trophy. He walked away, blending into the night like a soldier walking off the field after victory. Children inside a nearby house saw it happen through their window. They called the police immediately, giving a description of a heavy-set white male, glasses, short hair. The Zodiac? Police cars raced to the scene, but in a fatal mistake, dispatchers reported the suspect as a black male. Officers unknowingly drove past the real killer, who walked right by them on the street. The chance to catch him slipped through their fingers. Days later, another letter arrived at the Chronicle. This time it included the piece of Stine's shirt. Proof. Evidence. A taunt. The Zodiac mocked the police, ridiculed their failure, and threatened to shoot children on school buses, bragging about how easy it would be. You just shoot out the front tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Parents gripped their children tighter. School buses drove under escort. California had become a battlefield where every child felt like a target. The Zodiac was no longer just a murderer, he was terror incarnate.